Well, for more on the outlook for global innovation, Karina spoke with Francis Gurry. He's Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization. And Karina began by asking about how innovation is growing in China.
It's come a long way. So, we place less emphasis on the year-to-year changes in the Global Innovation Index rankings, although quite a remarkable performance, going up 5 places from 22 to 17 on the part of China. However, we can fit that into a trend, and there is a trend of China rising.
China and the U.S. are two countries with two very different political systems. How does their approach to innovation differ?
Well, in the United States of America, there's really no system for innovation in the sense of a planned strategy from one place. Rather, what we see is an ecosystem of fantastic institutions. Of course, we know in the United States of America, research institutions, universities, leading universities in the world, and innovative companies and innovative enterprises and innovation hubs, Silicon Valley, Boston, and so on, all around the whole country. And that all fits together in a market-based and a market-led process. And then you compare it to China, where you have a top-down led policy, with right from President Xi Jinping saying innovation is at the heart of our economic strategy, and it's a planned, much more planned and systemic approach. Now, the reality is both are producing dividends at the moment, and we have to see in the longer term how this plays out.
China and the U.S. are currently in a trade war triggered by the Trump administration's belief that China is stealing U.S. intellectual property. Is there any truth to these allegations?
Well, look, I can't tell you much about it because we're dealing here with a vast amount of evidence. So the Trump administration has put forward its case. The Chinese authorities are preparing their responses. This is subject to bilateral negotiations. It's also subject to a multilateral dispute resolution procedure for certain aspects of it.
What do you make of the state of intellectual property in China right now?
There may be, as the allegations say, there may be some deficiencies. That also belongs to an area which is not extremely transparent, because a lot of these allegations concern practices that relate where there's not a great deal of light and transparency in terms of cyber activity. But on the whole, what we see with China is the construction of a really first-class intellectual property system in the administration of intellectual property titles, in the production of them by the economy, and in judicial administration. And we shouldn't forget that.
Xi Jinping said that he is making efforts to increase protections for intellectual property in China. Is that happening?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is a high consciousness on the part of China that intellectual property is an important key to success of their strategy in innovation. So what we see is that increasingly China is a producer of new technologies. And you can't be a producer of new technologies unless you also want protection for them. So increasingly the interests of China have changed so that they now have a very, very strong interest in the protection of intellectual property.
What do you think of Trump's approach to essentially impose tariffs in the hopes of gaining concessions on intellectual property?
I don't think trade tensions and trade wars are a good thing. I don't think they're a good thing for the world at all. Of course, every country has to pursue its own interests. We all understand that. But this is not a good thing because the level of globalization that we've reached now means that we have these global value chains across the world. And if you take the smartphone of Apple, for example, as one example, of course, that's the end result has been produced by a number of different actors throughout the world. This is the case with so many products and services these days. Now, when you inject trade tension into that level of globalization, which relies on cooperation between economic actors in various countries, it's a risky situation.
Do you think that some of the rhetoric and this trade war has to do with the U.S. not wanting to lose its top position as the world's most innovative country?
Every time you have a new technology power that arrives in the world, there's tension. And that was the case when the United States of America became, the preeminent manufacturing power towards the end of the 19th century, displacing the United Kingdom. There was some tension there too. They resolved that entirely satisfactorily.